Renate's heart sank as she dialed Max's number. It had been weeks since the wedding, but she still didn't know when the ceremony had taken place. She had been left in the dark, excluded from what should have been the most important day of her son's life. For years, she had been there for Max, offering support without question, making sure he and his wife, Lena, were comfortable. She had paid their rent when they were struggling, furnished their apartment, and even helped with groceries. Her generosity was endless, but her love, it seemed, was not enough. When Max finally picked up the phone, his voice sounded distant, like a stranger on the other end. Renate felt a tight knot in her chest. "Max, when is your wedding?" She couldn't keep the tremor from her voice, trying to suppress the emotions she had kept hidden for so long. There was a long pause before Max finally replied. "We already got married," he said, his voice flat. "It was a small ceremony yesterday. Only special people were invited." Those words hit Renate like a punch to the stomach. Special people. That's what Max and Lena had called the guests at their wedding, and she wasn't one of them. For 3 years, Renate had been there, supporting them in every way she knew how, and this was how she was repaid. Special people. The words echoed in her head, replaying over and over again, each time more painful than the last. She stood there, holding the phone, her hand trembling. Her own son had excluded her from his wedding. She wasn't special enough. Renate felt a deep, suffocating silence fill the room. The pale pink dress she had bought for the occasion sat in her closet, useless, as did the new shoes she had hoped to wear on that day. She had spent weeks planning, saving up to give them a generous wedding gift of $1,000. All of that, every little detail, had meant nothing to them. Max's voice broke through her thoughts. "Mom, it was just a small thing. We kept it intimate, just the two of us with witnesses." "You understand, don't you?" The rehearsed tone in his voice made it clear he wasn't sorry. He was justifying. He didn't even apologize for the hurt he had caused. Was this really her son? She thought back to when he was a child, when he used to run to her, calling her the best mother in the world. Now he didn't even look her in the eye. "I'll call you later, Mom." The line went silent, and Renate stood in her living room, still holding the phone, as if the weight of it could somehow make sense of the situation. How had she allowed herself to become nothing more than an ATM for her own son and daughter-in-law? Later that evening, as Renate sat alone in her quiet house, the reality of what had just happened sank in. She felt humiliated. The tears didn't come, not at first. Instead, she sat in stunned silence, her mind running through the years of sacrifices she had made for Max and Lena, the countless times she had paid bills, bought furniture, and taken care of them. All that effort, all that money spent, and yet she wasn't even worth being invited to the wedding of her only child. A week passed in a haze of disbelief and frustration. Just 7 days after that crushing phone call, Lena called, her voice a far cry from the confident woman who had excluded Renate from the wedding. This time, Lena sounded desperate. "Renate, we're in trouble. The rent's overdue. The landlord says if we don't pay this week, we'll be kicked out." The words felt like another slap in the face. Renate had already paid their rent for months. The feeling of being used by them, of being treated as an afterthought, was unbearable. How dare they call her now, after what had happened? Renate remained calm. For the first time, she found herself choosing her words carefully. "Lena," she said, her voice measured, "didn't I warn you that I only help special people?" There was silence on the other end of the line. For the first time, Lena didn't have an answer. Renate's words had caught her off guard, just as her own feelings had caught her off guard. She had never expected this kind of treatment from Max and Lena. She had always been the one to give, to put them first, but now she was standing up for herself. It was a moment of realization, a moment when she saw the years of manipulation in sharp clarity. The money she had given them, the sacrifices she had made, had all been to prop up a life they never truly appreciated. When the phone call ended, Renate sat down and made a list. She couldn't help it. It was a way to make sense of everything, to understand how much of her life had been spent supporting their desires while neglecting her own needs. $500 a month for their rent, $200 a month for food, $3,000 for birthdays, Christmas gifts, and random expenses. $800 for Lena's medical emergencies, $2,500 for a car loan that was never repaid, $600 for a broken air conditioner. The total came to more than $33,000, money she had taken from her savings, from the money her late husband had left her, money she had put aside for her future. Renate's heart sank as she stared at the number, $33,400. That was the price of the years she had spent being a silent provider. And for what? To be humiliated? To be told she wasn't special enough to attend her son's wedding? That night, Renate cried. Not out of sadness, but out of anger. She cried for all the years she had spent trying to make herself indispensable, trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect mother-in-law. She cried because for the first time, she realized how much she had given and how little she had received in return. But as the tears fell, something shifted within her. She was done. The money, the sacrifices, they had been one-sided, and it was time to take control. The next morning, Renate made a decision. She would no longer fund Max and Lena's life. It wasn't just about the money. It was about her dignity, her sense of self. For too long, she had allowed them to use her, to make her feel like she was only valuable when she was giving, but no more. Renate's first decision was the hardest, to stop the automatic transfers. It wasn't just about cutting off the financial support. It was about cutting off a part of herself that had always been there for Max and Lena. It felt like severing a limb, but deep down, she knew it was necessary. That morning, she walked into the bank with a steady stride. For the first time in years, she didn't hesitate. Mr. Clean, the bank manager, recognized her immediately as she walked through the door. "Mrs. Richter," he greeted warmly, though his eyes showed concern. "Is everything all right?" She smiled, though there was little warmth behind it. "I need to cancel the automatic transfers I've set up for my son." Mr. Kleene was silent for a moment. He was used to seeing Renate walk in, year after year, making the same payments to Max and Lena. But today, something was different. "Are you sure, Mrs. Richter?" he asked softly, knowing this was a significant decision. "Yes," she replied, her voice firm. "I've made up my mind." As he processed the paperwork, Renate watched him closely. For the first time, she didn't feel the familiar pang of guilt. It was as if a weight was lifting off her chest. The more she thought about it, the more certain she became. She was doing the right thing, not just for herself, but for them as well. It was time for them to stand on their own 2 feet. When she left the bank, the world outside seemed quieter, as though the constant noise of her own self-doubt had finally faded. She was no longer tied to Max and Lena through money, and that simple realization gave her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. That afternoon, the phone rang. Max's name flashed across the screen. Her heart skipped a beat. Was this the moment he would apologize? She had expected this call for days, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to hear what he had to say. The phone rang again, and again. Each time Renate let it ring. Her hand hovered over the screen, but she never answered. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't known in years: control. The calls eventually stopped. Max had never been the type to give up, but he had learned, over the years, that when his mother made up her mind, there was little that could change it. Renate didn't feel the usual urgency to pick up the phone. Instead, she walked into the kitchen, poured herself a cup of coffee, and sat down at the table. For once, the silence felt comfortable. It had been years since she had allowed herself to sit still and think about her own life. She had always been so focused on Max, on Lena, on making sure they had everything they needed. But today, she was focused on herself. She realized that she had spent so long pleasing others that she had forgotten what it felt like to take care of herself. That night, the phone rang again, but this time it wasn't Max. It was Lena, calling from an unfamiliar number. Renate's fingers hesitated on the screen. "Renate," Lena's voice came through, sweet but tinged with desperation. "Please don't hang up. We need to talk." There was a tone in Lena's voice that Renate hadn't heard before. Desperation. Renate leaned back in her chair. "What's this about, Lena?" Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. She no longer felt the need to be accommodating. We didn't mean for things to get this bad. Lena's voice cracked. The rent is overdue. We're in trouble, Renate. Please help us. We need you. Renate paused for a moment, letting the silence stretch. It was hard to hold her ground, but she knew she couldn't let this continue. She had been so compliant, so willing to bend over backward for them, but no more. Lena, Renate said quietly, you've always known what I could do for you. I've always been there when you needed money, when you needed help. But now, I need to take care of myself. Lena's voice softened, and for a moment, Renate heard a hint of manipulation. But Renate, you've been so good to us. We love you. You're like a second mom to me. The words were familiar, but Renate didn't fall for them anymore. She had heard them too many times when they needed something. Lena, she said firmly, I've realized something. I can't keep doing this. I've spent years enabling you both, and I've only ever been used for my money. It's time for you to stand on your own. For a few seconds there was silence. Then Lena spoke again, her voice trembling. We really need your help. We don't know what else to do. Renate took a deep breath, then said, I can't be your ATM anymore. I've been a provider for too long. Now I need to be something else, for myself, and you need to figure this out on your own. With that, she ended the call. Renate sat in the stillness of her home, a strange calm settling over her. This was it. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. For so long, she had allowed herself to be a passive participant in her own story, but now she was taking charge. She didn't feel the guilt she had expected to feel. Instead, there was a deep sense of relief, as though a weight had been lifted. But the relief was brief. The very next day, as Renate was finishing her breakfast, there was a knock at the door. Max and Lena had arrived. Renate had expected this. She knew they wouldn't give up so easily. But she was ready now. She wasn't the same woman who had let them walk all over her. She stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. Max was standing there, looking frustrated, and Lena was beside him, her eyes red from crying. Mom, Max said, his voice harsh, we don't understand. You're throwing us out. You can't just cut us off. Renate took a deep breath and stepped aside, motioning for them to come in. They walked into her living room, but Renate stood by the door, unwilling to offer them the comfort she once would have. You're wrong, she said. I'm not throwing you out. I'm just asking you to take responsibility for your own lives. Max glared at her. We've been paying rent for years. You owe us. You can't just cut us off like this. Renate's eyes narrowed. I've given you everything I had to give. Everything. But I've realized that my money was never enough. You didn't care about me. You only cared about what I could give you. Lena opened her mouth to speak, but Renate held up a hand to stop her. No. I've heard it all before. I've always been there when you needed something, but I'm not going to let you guilt me into continuing this cycle. I'm not your provider anymore. Max's face flushed with anger, but Renate didn't back down. You need to figure things out on your own. It's time for you both to grow up and stop relying on me. Lena began to cry, but this time Renate didn't feel the usual pang of sympathy. She had been there for too long, and the reality was harsh. They had used her, and now it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. Max stood up and walked toward the door, but before he left, he turned to Renate. You're going to regret this. You know that, right? You're going to be alone. Renate didn't flinch. I already am, Max, she said softly. But now, it's by choice. The door slammed shut behind them, and Renate stood there for a moment, letting the silence wash over her. She was finally free. As the days passed, Max and Lena continued to try and contact her. They left messages, sent texts, and even showed up at her door a few more times. But Renate was resolute. She no longer felt the compulsion to answer their calls. She was no longer bound by their needs, and the peace she had found was worth more than anything they could offer. A week passed in what seemed like a strange, quiet limbo. Renate's phone remained untouched, sitting idle on the kitchen counter. The silence in her house had become her constant companion, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel suffocating. She spent her mornings in the garden, nurturing the flowers she had long ignored, and her afternoons reading books she hadn't opened since her husband's passing. Slowly but surely, she started to reclaim the life she had put on hold for others, but it was never that simple. Max and Lena hadn't disappeared from her life entirely. They kept calling, sending messages, and even showing up uninvited at her house. Their presence was a constant reminder of the emotional war she had waged and the peace she was trying to build. Every knock on her door made her heart race, but she had learned to breathe through it, reminding herself that this was her choice. No one could take it from her, not even her own family. The phone rang again, and this time Renate didn't even flinch. She glanced at the screen. It was Max. She could feel the familiar knot of unease tighten in her chest, but she didn't pick it up. Not today. She turned the phone face down, letting it ring unanswered. They wanted something from her, but they weren't going to get it anymore. Renate had made a vow to herself. She would no longer be manipulated, controlled, or guilted into submission. She would no longer allow herself to be a pawn in their game. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, there was another knock at the door. Renate didn't bother to check the camera. She already knew who it was. She stood up, walked over, and opened it with a calm she hadn't known she was capable of. Max stood on the doorstep, his face taut with frustration. He looked different somehow, more anxious, more desperate. Lena wasn't with him. Renate didn't know if that was a good sign or a bad one, but she braced herself. "Mom," Max said, his voice tight, "we need to talk." Renate didn't invite him in. Instead, she crossed her arms and looked at him, her gaze steady and unyielding. "What's there to talk about, Max?" she asked quietly. "You've made your choices. I've made mine." Max let out a deep breath, his shoulders slumping. "We're in a tough spot, Mom. You know how it is. You've always been there for us. Now, we're just asking for a little bit of help." Renate didn't respond right away. The words that came out of his mouth seemed so familiar, so predictable. He had said the same thing before, every time he needed something. But this time, she wasn't the same woman. She wasn't the woman who would cave, who would give in to guilt and pity. "Help? Max, for 3 years I've given you everything. I've paid your rent, bought your food, fixed your problems, and you've never once appreciated it. Not really. You've always wanted more." Max looked like he was about to speak, but Renate raised her hand to stop him. "You're not here because you love me, Max. You're here because you need me. I'm no longer going to let you use me." The words hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Max's face reddened. He opened his mouth, but this time there was no rehearsed line. The mask of control was slipping, and Renate saw the panic behind his eyes. "You're making a huge mistake, Mom," Max said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is going to ruin everything." Renate felt the old pang of guilt, the instinct to fix things, but she pushed it aside. She was done with guilt. She had to be. "What will ruin everything, Max? Me taking control of my own life?" She took a step closer to him, locking eyes with him. "If I'm ruining anything, it's the life you've made out of using me. I'm done with it." Max's lips tightened, and for a moment, Renate thought he might snap. Instead, he stood there, staring at her with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "I don't want to lose you, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "We've always been close." For a moment, Renate felt a flicker of doubt. She closed her eyes and remembered the little boy who had once called her the best mom in the world, the child who used to climb into her lap and hug her tight after every nightmare. That boy was still inside him somewhere. But the man standing in front of her was no longer the son she had known. He had changed, and so had she. "Max, the son I raised doesn't exist anymore. You've become someone else, and so have I." Renate's voice softened, but her words were resolute. "I can't keep being the person who enables your life while ignoring my own. It's time for both of us to move forward." Max opened his mouth again, but this time no words came out. The fight was gone from him. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment, Renate saw the weariness in his face. The battle was over. "I'm sorry, Mom," Max said, his voice barely audible. He turned and walked down the steps without another word, leaving Renate standing in the doorway, her heart heavy but not broken. The next morning, Renate received a call. She knew it would come. Lena was finally reaching out. The message was clear. Lena wanted to fix things. She had always been the more direct of the two, and Renate knew what was coming. "Renate, I understand why you're upset," Lena said, her voice tinged with guilt. "Max is, well, Max, but we really miss you. You're like family to me. I've never meant to hurt you." Renate paused, considering her next words carefully. She had heard the sweet voice of apology too many times, only for it to turn into a plea for money when things got tough. But this time, Renate could see through it. "Lena," she said softly but firmly, "you've only ever called me when you needed something. I don't want to be a part of that anymore. I've realized that my love for you can't be bought with money. I can't keep enabling you both. You need to figure it out on your own." Lena's voice faltered. "Renate, please. We're really sorry. We don't want to lose you." Renate let out a deep breath. "You've already lost me, Lena, but not because of what you think. I'm just choosing to live for myself now." Lena didn't respond immediately, and Renate knew she had no more words to offer. She wasn't going to beg for apologies or explanations anymore. She had made her decision. The silence stretched out between them, but this time, Renate wasn't afraid of it. She wasn't afraid of the loneliness that threatened to creep in. The truth was, she had already been alone for a long time. Now the difference was that this loneliness was on her terms. The phone calls stopped. Weeks passed, and Renate's life settled into a rhythm that was entirely her own. She spent her days taking long walks in the park, rediscovering her love for painting, and joining a local volunteer group that helped women in need. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing to fill someone else's needs. She was filling her own. One afternoon, Renate received a letter in the mail. It was from Max and Lena's lawyer, and her heart skipped a beat. They had hired legal counsel in a final, desperate attempt to regain control over her finances. They were claiming that she had become mentally incompetent and demanding that she sign over her assets. The legal jargon was thick and heavy, but Renate could feel the weight of their desperation through every line. "They really think they can take everything from me," Renate muttered under her breath. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had already fought the biggest battle of her life, the battle for her own dignity and independence.